And next up, we will talk about the revolution of slow journalism. And please welcome Alberto Puliafito, editor-in-chief of Slow News. Together with Alberto, we will today explore the opportunities that freelancers can find in this growing movement that is responding to the crisis of traditional journalism. He will share the key concepts and tell us how to create innovative and unique stories and how to pitch slow journalism ideas to editors. Hi, Alberto, we are ready for you.
Hi anyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Alberto, everybody can hear you, I think, and also we can see your presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot. So first of all, let me thank you for the invitation. I'm simply thrilled and excited to be part of this amazing event. And thanks to the World Organization and to anyone joining the conversation. And thanks also for your time and for your patience with my Italian English. I promise I'll try not to say something like first reaction shock. If you follow Italian politics facts, you probably know what I mean. And if you don't, well, just Google it. Okay, said that, we can start. But first, let me remember that if you want to listen to this Slow News Revolution story in proper English, but also from very influential people in the world of journalism, you can just book your spot to see Slow News, the documentary, which is available for free these days for those attending the conference, thanks to the European Journalist Center. So let me start with a story. In 2014, I was the editor-in-chief of a big Italian digital newspaper, and my newsroom was producing between 400 and 800 articles per day. So my task as an editor-in-chief was not actually to be sure that those amount of articles was great journalism, because as you can see and as you can imagine, it's almost impossible to guarantee that if you are a small independent newsroom. But rather, I was expected by my publisher to guarantee large volumes of traffic on the websites that made up this digital newspaper. In some way, more than a newspaper, we could define it as a content factory. Once one of my journalists told me, today I've written 10 articles and I simply can't remember the first one. So thinking about this, and during the time, I realized that content was the keyword. They are called content, and they are all around us. What you see when you access any channel, informative, conversational, relational, it's first of all an uninterrupted proliferation of pieces of content of any kinds, videos, textual stories, pieces of content that you will find even in the next 10 years, or that will disappear after 24 hours or less. Short, long, hypertextual, connected. So if once production and distribution of content was a sort of oligopoly, which led to also to a patternistic approach. Today, everyone can produce and distribute pieces of content and reach audiences previously simply unimaginable for those who didn't have access to the button rooms of the old oligopoly. The cost of producing and distributing and distributing pieces of content is constantly decreasing. As you know, it is enough to have a smartphone, an internet connection, and a social platform to be able to produce and distribute tons of pieces of content in a day. And most of all, this is not a mechanism that we can stop. The previous condition of scarcity cannot be reproduced. So for many people, this is bad. For others, it's something to enhance. But if we could just avoid for a moment the moral judgment, we would see this as something that has happened and that it is happening, and we have to face with this situation. Moreover, the newspapers has now platforms, digital platforms, has competitors in the most important part of their traditional business model, which was, of course, advertising. the reason why I was supposed to bring a huge amount of traffic on our websites was the fact that the business model was based on clicks, on advertising. And basically, the reaction from publisher and from the newsrooms to this situation has been in the last 20 years very similar to my past job. I know that I have to make some generalization, so I apologize for that. But apart from very rare cases, the reaction was based basically on two elements: quantity and speed. And then from some years, paywalls everywhere, like the paywall is the answer to all our problems in these days. However, let's focus for an instant on quantity and speed. These two elements clash against a fact that you can't change. It is almost impossible to compete in quantity and speed in a landscape where anyone can produce and distribute pieces of content. You will lose the battle on speed and quantity. And the point is that this has been a choice. It wasn't mandatory. It's been a choice to be in the digital landscape in this way. And it's very difficult to say why we took this choice, because it's been perpetrated for various reasons. It's difficult to list them all. Let's try to give at least a quick overview. We have for sure a cultural and historical reason. Being fast, going out first, has always been considered an important thing in journalism. And moreover, historically, journalism has filled spaces. What does it mean? Let's think, for example, about an hard copy newspaper. If it's made up of 64 pages, for example, those pages must all be filled, either by high quality content or by advertising or by fillers. Then we have organizational reasons. Once a newsroom is organized to be fast and to fill the space, it's very difficult to change because you are stuck in the model. Then we have a low propensity to invest in research and development. At least this is what I've seen in Italy, which is the context I know better. And then we have an historical monolithic point of view from which newspapers are conceived, directed, produced, distributed. And then we have the natural resistance to change on the part of people working in the newsrooms. Sometimes they are right, because sometimes there are changes that are imposed for the pure love of change, rather than to adapt to the changing world and context. And then we have a scarce aptitude to think of journalism as a product and a service at the same time, a poor attitude to the audience listening, because the newsroom historically is the place where you think, yes, we are producing and building meaning, making sense, telling you what is good for you to know. But the last 40 years of history have also devastated this paradigm, not only the business model. And in fact, we are coming to the business model. One of our rules as journalists is always follow the money. And we have economic reason. The business model of journalism has always been based on quantitative metrics. So, for example, historically, if a newspaper had got a huge distribution, it was able to sell advertising at higher prices. This was true, at least in the old world. And when you are stuck in that model, the only thing that you can do in the digital landscape is trying to go faster, to produce more, to use strategies that allow you to take advantage of everything new, to bring more clicks on the websites. And then what I call the digital paradox happens. The value of something in the capitalist economy is the measure of its scarcity. And if the spaces where advertising banners can be displayed increase, the value of those spaces decrease. And therefore, to continue earning the same amount, If in the past you just needed 1,000 clicks, for example, now you need 10,000 clicks, which means a never-ending cycle, which is actually not a cycle, it's a spiral. And it's a spiral making things worse and worse, because in this disarming scenario, it's always journalistic quality that pays the price. You can't go fast and do well. You can't do much more than yesterday and do well. And also workers and freelancers pay the price. In Italy, you can find journalists paid 5 euros for an article. What kind of article can you produce with this amount of money guarantee? And last but not the least, people formerly known as the audience pay the price, because they will be reached by bad journalism. And this was before the pandemic. Then the COVID-19 happens. Content production increased. We are even using a new word to call it. It's infodemic. And not surprisingly, this word has been used for the first time, not last year, but during the SARS epidemic in 2003. The amount of content increased enormously. The problem is that journalism is a job that requires time, space, collaboration, reasoning, and money. And to make matter worse, the whole system has been hijacked in some way. How? Well, just think about a declaration by a politician. A politician declares a certain thing by the old way of thinking about journalism, the declaration is a news. The result is that provocative messages of all kinds cross the infosphere on their behalf, produced for getting political consent, for example. They are fed by the mechanism of the algorithms of the various platforms. Then they are intercepted by the first newspapers, which covers the news by amplifying the message. And from there, in Ricasco, all the others follow, each according to their own editorial line, or even without any kind of structured thought, limiting themselves to, for example, declaring statements, replies to those declarations, indignations, and so on. And this, of course, leads also to polarization of the conversation. And the point is that sometimes we as journalists are often responsible for the same polarization that we blame. So we should probably ask ourselves, is news something valuable? Is it something that you need to know? Or is it just something new, strange, emotional, clickbaiting, attention baiting? Because it's very different. You may ask, why do we have to change if all this is not enough? Maybe you may not feel the need for any change, of course. But the problem is also that journalism, as you know, is in crisis. So I don't want to be here to repeat all the complaint about the struggle of journalism, the crisis of journalism. But we have at least to say that there are at least 4 distinct crises of journalism nowadays. A crisis of trust, which is, for example, promptly measured by the Edelman report each year. People don't trust journalists anymore. This is a crisis that has direct consequences on the role of journalism as one of the pillars of democracy. We have an identity crisis. Newspapers are still struggling to find their role in the complex scenario of overproduction of content I described. Of course, we have a personal and work crisis. Journalists paid less and less. And if you are not well paid as a journalist, you are not free to do your job. And sometimes you also find journalists which are completely disconnected from the reality, because they have not developed the skills that allow them to get out of the business as usual. And then, of course, we have the economic crisis, because the business model no longer works. So I personally think that these are the problems that justify the need to find solutions, not the love for innovation as an end in itself. And so what can we do to change things? First of all, let's take a breath together. And then let's ask ourselves, for example, how can I create a journalistic product or service that does not fall into the well-known problems and that aims to have a positive impact on the infosphere in general. With this approach, this is the approach I adopted when I started doing research to understand if there were alternative models, and which led me to founding my journalistic startup, which is called Slow News. And the good news is that there are alternative models, and many too. The bad news is that they are too young to be sure that they work, and moreover, probably they are not well known in the landscape, and there is no longer a simple, unique model that works for every newsroom. So this makes things even more complex. But if you think about it, it makes also the challenge even more interesting. So again, the first thing that is important to say is that there are alternatives. I know that you can't change everything with a snap, but sometimes you need someone proposing radical changes, even if that change is achieved on multi-generational scales. And the solution I'm proposing, which is a possible alternative, not the only one, but it's a possible alternative to the business as usual, is the concept of slow news. You may ask, what does it mean? It's not about the pace. It's not about speed. It's about the method and the philosophy. If you want, it's a sort of a word style, lifestyle choice. Slow news, slow journalism are brands, tags to call this movement. So let's focus on the principles to better understand them. The first one is that time is our wealth. We need the time to produce great journalism. We don't fill spaces. We produce content that takes time to be produced and that will last in time. And we need time even to enjoy leisure. The second one is the fact that people are at the heart of the project. This means moving from the approach of those who produce pieces of content in a paternalistic and authoritarian way. I know what's bad for you and what you need to know. This is the old approach, to someone who cares about people. And so it's a listening approach, an asking approach. What would you like to know? What would be useful for you to understand better the world, for your interests, for your life? This means reasoning to serve a community which must be known, involved, inhabited, lived. And then we, of course, have technology at the heart of the project, but technology as a tool, not as something magic solving our problems. A tool that we can use for delivery our pieces of content, to have them found, to deliver them to people who know us or who don't know us at all, for conversation, cooperation, for sharing experiences as we are doing today, to enhance our job, to share experiences. Then this is, I'm sorry, the radical part, no advertising. The combination of advertising and journalism has worked for years, now no longer. So I know, again, that you can't change in the legacy media, in the mainstream, these in a snap, but at least we can try if we are starting building something from the bottom. Advertising led traditional journalism to follow the clickbaiting path. And so we say no to advertising. Then cooperation. This can't be an approach that can be had in solitude. It requires a table of different skills, a work with different people, in which journalistic and editorial competencies works together with those of designers, developers, marketing people, sales. And maybe we could also work in competition, sharing experiences with our former competitors, trying to building something better together. In order to do this, we also have to completely rethink the whole concept of news and the editorial production and work. So we have to work on valuable content that will last in time, that will be actually the first draft of history. We don't care about the controversy of the day. We try to produce pieces of content that people can use in their lives to improve themselves as citizens, to make better decisions. So we are not focused on what's new. We focus on what you actually need to know. And so maybe you could think about this when pitching your stories, for example, trying this different approach, asking yourself, how long will be this story valuable? Is it unique? Can I update it, following it during time? How will I deliver it? Because I have to think also about that part, and so on. This means also completely redesign the relationship between journalists and audiences, involving them, engaging the communities, the audiences, other people as experts with knowledges, talking with them, asking them to help us with our job, with the delivery of our content, with their knowledge. For example, in Slow News, we are using Google Docs to share the first draft of our stories and asking our members, please help us to improve it, make us questions, try to find mistakes, suggest us these readings or those experts, for example. And it works because people feel to be part of something. Then, of course, work must be paid. And that's something that should interest you as freelancers, of course, because if you like this approach, then some things are needed. For example, you have to start saying no to bad paid jobs. You have to find this kind of newsrooms to place your stories. And maybe you should also want to act spreading these ideas by practicing them. But on the other side, it's important to have different models to diversify sources of revenues, for example. So you can find newsrooms working on European grants or making workshops to diversify the sources of revenues. But on the other side, journalism can't be a toy for the wealthiest. So, for example, Slow News has a business model which is, we can call it pay as much as you can. And then less is more. We can do less, we can reduce toxic emissions. The content that pollute the infosphere, which have no added value for people, can be cut off. And at the same time, efforts could be made to produce pieces of content empowering people in this digital ecological operation. In the highest sense of the term, to enable them to understand the world, the space that we call the infosphere, which will be increasingly important in the years to come. So cut the noise, listen to the audiences, provide them great stories, deliver them in different ways on different platforms, reach them where they are. There are so many things that we can do that we simply can't focus on our job on speed and quantity. So coming to a conclusion, you are probably wondering if this is working. And these are different newsrooms in different countries and with different ideas, trying this kind of approach. They are increasing in numbers year after year. Unfortunately, I can't guarantee that this will work, but I'm sure that if you still think that journalism is a pillar for our democracies, at least we should give this approach a chance. So thank you so much for your attention, and I think that if you want, question time is coming.
Hi Alberto, ciao.
Ciao.
We have ciao, come stai? We have some questions from the audience, and let me ask you one from Andy. Andy asks you, can you give a concrete example of slow journalism and the impact it had or it has?
You can find a lot of examples in the newsrooms that I provided. If you want an example that we are working on in Italy, we are working on the concept of cancel culture, which in Italy has been taken for granted by the US, even if we are not in the US. And we are providing our members a content to spread, to better understand what do they think in the US when they talk about cancel culture. And the second one we are just started working on is the a sort of tracker of how Italian governments will invest European funds we had after the COVID pandemic. So the objective of this project is to monitor in the next 20 years this kind of investment.
We have another question from Jesus. Jesus says, how is the success of this work measured? If not by clicks, then how might you know it's working in a measurable, data-driven way?
Very interesting. So our North Pole metric is, of course, the number of memberships, the number of active memberships. On the other side, as I mentioned, we diversify our revenue sources. So we are not only based on our members' payment, but we also participate in grants and make workshops to stabilize and make our job sustainable.
We can go with one more question from Jeremy. Building networks and relationships with the audience, like you mentioned, this practice of sharing the information will not break our journalism ethics?
It's very interesting. Thanks for the questions, and maybe we can go deeper in the comments. It depends on how strong is your identity as a newsroom. I mean, if you have your principle, you are not going to change them because you are talking with the audience. And the audience, if you are very transparent with them in the process of building your journalism, the audience will know that you are working with that principle as a basis. So the ethical of our job is not corrupted at all. At least you work on it in advance.
We have time for the last one. This is from McGarry. Great talk. Thank you. Alberto, do you think the mainstream news will start to turn back towards a more slow news approach?
If you think about it in some way, they started cutting even in some very big newspapers like Le Monde or The Guardian, the number of content provided. It's very difficult for them because they are still very stuck with the old model and with the fact that if something is happening, you as a big newspaper have to had this specific news on your website. But yes, they in some way they are trying this approach. Of course, it's easier. Not economically, but it's easier if you are very small and you start from zero to build this approach.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Grazie mille. Thank you for being here today.
Gracias, Alberto. Thank you very much. So we have a couple of more questions in the chat. Alberto, if you want to go to YouTube and answer them directly, that would be amazing.
Labdien. Buenos dias. Buenos dias.
Hi. Hello.
This is the European Journalism Center.
Since 1992,
we've been helping journalists all over Europe.
Now we ask for your support.
Join the European Journalism Collective.
And with a small donation, you can help us remain independent and sustainable.
So we can continue supporting journalists just like you.
And do even more.
And do even more. And do even more.